We're live.
Saan ko makikita yung link? Sorry.
Just go to our page. It's in our page. Tapos na may live tab doon. So,
Alright.
you should be able to see that. Yeah.
Hindi siya sa event mismo. Okay, watch live. Okay.
Rach, you can see my screen.
Not yet. Pero yan. That's the screen.
Yan?
That's your screen. Yep. Can you see it? Right there. May nagbebenta.
Ay, sorry. Ako eh. Wait lang.
Merienda na daw. Actually, we're now live.
Oh, great.
Yes. Welcome to Social Conversations, everyone.
But I can still hear someone. Hindi ba?
Alright, good afternoon everyone. Magandang hapon sa lahat ng mga nanonood ngayon at sa mga leader kabataang nakasubaybay sa ating Manila Hub, co-organized by the UN Youth Advisory Board Philippines, na kung saan itong social conversations ay forum series na bukas sa lahat para sa maalam na diskusyon pagdating sa mga isyong panlipunan. So bago ang lahat, gusto lang namin pasalamatan ang aming organization partners. We have E-Waste, Bridge 360, Reboot Philippines, UST-CBA Council, Youth Advocates for the Philippines, Sigaw ng Kabataan Coalition, Earthguard USLS, SK San Rafael San Rodriguez Rizal, Lunduyan, and Youth for Human Rights and Democracy. Ako po pala si Mark Joseph Teseste from the Global Shapers Manila Hub, ang magiging host nyo para sa ngayong hapon. At ngayon din, pag-uusapan natin ang controversial anti-terrorism law na nilagdaan ng Pangulo kahapon lamang. Nag-imbita kami ng mga discussants mula sa iba't ibang sektor para pakinggan ang kanilang panig pagdating sa nasabing usapin in healthy and legal discussion para sa importanteng katanungan, ano nga ba ang pulso ng taong bayan pagdating sa anti-terror law? Comment down below your thoughts at kung may mga katanungan kayo, please comment it down below dahil mamimigay kami ng 100 pesos each load for the selected 3 winners sponsored by Lunduyan. And bago ang lahat, dahil tayo ay naka-live via Facebook page at YouTube account ni Global Shapers Manila Hub, please, we encourage everyone to please make time to share it in your timeline para yung mga kaibigan nyo rin ay makapag-join sa ating live discussion. And friendly reminder din po to keep the discussion chill and informative. Please iwasan din po natin yung mga personal attacks or comments that are derogatory to any age, gender, culture, and identity. Alright, so to formally begin our social conversation, I'd like to call on the curator of the Global Shapers Manila Hub for the opening remarks. And to introduce, she is the junior hair transplant specialist at Pineda Hair Clinics and the co-founder of Tiny Labs, an educational content provider. Please welcome Ms. Erica Pineda.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. And thanks for tuning in. On behalf of the Global Shapers Manila Hub, I would like to thank our speakers and moderators for coming to the table today despite their differences. I'm certain that most, if not all of you, can relate to being told not to talk about religion or politics. And I think about the consequences of this and feel the weight of thousands of conversations that I should have had over the years. Those hard conversations being opportunities to listen to another person's perspective and perhaps even work through an issue together. The truth is that these days it feels like I'm always playing catch up because I've only recently learned how bills are passed into law. That being said, I am so happy that team leads Joshua, Jerome, Rage, Mark, and all of our partners, most especially Mr. Jean Guevara of the UN Youth Advisory Board, decided to pursue these social conversations. And I'm proud of all of you sitting in on this call today for having the courage to listen. Before we get started, the Global Shapers community is a network of over 9,000 young people from 148 countries driving dialogue, action, and change. The Manila Hub was founded in 2011 by Karen Davila and is one of the earliest formed hubs in the world. We are a collective of diverse leaders from very different backgrounds, united by a common vision, a better world starting with our very own Manila. Last year, we focused on policy, climate change, workforce readiness, human trafficking, and COVID-19. We led 20 projects, including Bayanihan, to address the problem of food security in the early days of lockdown, Wear Forward to deliver PPEs to frontliners in need, and COVID facts in the battle against disinformation. Projects this year will focus on civic action, voter education, upskilling underserved communities for digital work, inclusivity, climate change, and the future of work and learning. So if any of this is interesting to you, please reach out to us on our website or our social media accounts. Thank you and have a good evening.
All right, maraming salamat Erica for that inspiring remarks and also for the introduction of the Global Shapers Manila Hub. So now moving on sa ating pinaka-inaabangang segment ng panel discussion. Para i-introduce sa inyo ang ating panel, allow me to introduce first our moderator for this afternoon. He is a multi-platform news reporter from the ABS-CBN Integrated News and Current Affairs, where he covers the general assignment beat, particularly Manila and Quezon City Police District, at the graveyard shift and produces news packages for Umagang Kay Ganda, TV Patrol, DZMM Teleradio, and ANC Newscast. He is also a college instructor in the Trinity University of Asia, where he teaches courses in broadcast practices and principles, broadcast and interactive journalism, and emerging media. He is currently a master's degree student in media studies at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and also graduated Bachelor of Arts in Broadcast Communication cum laude from the same university. It's my honor to welcome you, Mr. Jervis Manahan.
Lahat ng mga nanonood sa atin, sa lahat po ng mga nakatutok sa Facebook and YouTube Live, I hope you're having a good afternoon. It's a very opportune time to be talking about the anti-terrorism law because it has just been signed yesterday. And there are so many developments today because as we speak, there are people in UP Diliman right now who are protesting against the law. And kanina lang, a group of lawyers from the Calleja law firm has opposed or is opposing the law sa Supreme Court and they have filed their petition. So ano nga ba itong anti-terror law na ito? So ngayong hapon ay hihimayin natin yung mga effects niya sa iba't ibang sectors at yung we will be discussing the opposing sides of this very controversial law. So to start, we'll be having two panels. The first panel will be discussing the pros and cons of this anti-terror law, and we'll be having speakers. And after that, we'll be entertaining some of your questions. And then we will be proceeding to another panel where we will be discussing the sectoral effects of this anti-terror law. So let's start. Our first speaker is Commissioner Ryan Enriquez of the National Youth Commission. Commissioner Enriquez is the chairperson of the National Youth Commission. Prior to his appointment, Ryan Enriquez served as provincial board member of the province of Cavite for 3 consecutive terms. On his first term as board member, he was elected as member of the board of directors of Region 4A of the Provincial Board Members League of the Philippines, or PBMLP. On his second term, he was elected regional chairman of Region 4A of PBMLP. And on his third term, he was appointed as interim national treasurer and finally elected as national chairman of PBMLP. Subsequently, he got elected as liaison officer of the Union of Local Authorities of the Philippines, or ULAP, which is the umbrella organization of all the leagues of local officials. At the same time, he was an active member of the National Movement of Young Legislators. On the side, he is an accomplished table tennis player, which became his passport to scholarships at the San Beda College for his degree in business management, major in entrepreneurship. He competed in the UAAP when he was taking graduate studies and also received recognition as Rookie of the Year at the Pontifical University of the Philippines, the University of Santo Tomas. So I'm turning you over to Commissioner Ryan Enriquez. You have 15 minutes to discuss your stance on the anti-terror law. Commissioner, good afternoon.
Magandang hapon po kay Congressman Sara Ilago and Jervis Manahan at sa lahat po ng mga online viewers ng Social Conversations. Mainit-init pa po dahil kahapon lang nilagdaan ni Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte ang RA 9372, ang Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020. Sa demokrasya, magandang marinig ang iba't ibang pananaw, kritiko o puna na gawain ng gobyerno. Tulad ngayon, ang pagkakaroon po ng diskusyon patungkol dito, yung mga nagpoprotesta, yung mga aktivismo laban sa batas na ito po lahat ay bahagi ng proseso at pagbuo ng batas. Ngunit ang anumang uri ng pamahalaan demokratiko man or hindi, ang terorismo po ay walang maidudulot na maganda sa ating bansa. At kailangan nating itong labanan. Kung susumayin po ang terorismo, ang crime against humanity po at sa lahat naman dito ay kinokondena natin, di ba? At tingnan natin ang statistics at meron po tayong slide. Pwede po natin ipakita. Ang datos po ng Global Terrorism Index of 2019, number 9 na po tayo sa buong mundo sa dami ng terrorism. At ito po yung mga biktima ng terrorism. Dito po natin makikita, number 9 po tayo sa worldwide. And sa Asia Pacific countries naman po ay number 1 po tayo sa ranking. Next slide. Marami na pong naitalang pag-atake at namatay sa Pilipinas at walang pinipiling lugar ito at pinapasabog yung mga katedral sa Jolo, sa Cotabato at Davao. And next slide. Tinuturing din po na terorismo ang Inupakan Massacre sa Leyte at 67 po yung mga naging skeletal na remain. Ang involved po rito ay ang CPP-NPA, ang Bicos Massacre na 39 na ang churchgoers ang napatay din po ng mga NPA, ang MB Dulos bombing, 2 foreign crew at 32 po yung wounded at ang LRT bombing, 22 po yung napatay, 100 po yung wounded, yung Mama Sapano incident in Maguindanao, yung 44 SAP personnel ay napatay. Yung Super Perry bombing, 14 was bombed, and Abu Sayyaf, and 116 po yung mga passengers, and wounded ng several others. At sa makatuwid po, tapos na ba yung PowerPoint? Sa makatuwid po, kailangan nating balikan ang batas patungkol sa fight against terrorism, kaya ginagawa itong Terrorism Bill of 2020. Ang National Youth Commission po ay kinatawan ng pamahalaan, nakapokus sa pagsulong at kaligtasan ng mga kabataan. Ang mga grupong involved at sinusuportahan ng NYC ay ang grupo ng Hands of Our Children, ang League of Parents, at sila yung mga magulang na lumalaban para matigil ang mga pagre-recruit ng kanilang mga anak. Isama na dyan si Mrs. Relisa Lucena, yung anak niyang si AJ. Until now ay nawawala pa rin. And kasama rin po natin yung KKDAT, yung mga kabataan kontra droga at terorismo. Nandiyan din po yung Youth for Peace at ang National Task Force to End Local Communism, yung NTF-LCAC. At para po nakatutok, para tapusin na po ang komunista sa ating bansa. At sa pagtatapos, nais ko lang pong pasalamatan ang pagkakataong ito para pag-usapan ang Anti-Terrorism Bill at mabuhay po ang kabataang Pilipino.
Okay, is that it? Commissioner, you have some more time? Okay. Oh, if that's it, we have to move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker, to present the other side of the anti-terror law, we have Congresswoman Sarah Jane Ilago of the Kabataan Party List. Sarah Jane Ilago is the first female representative of the Youth Party List Kabataan in the House of Representatives of the Philippines. Sarah served as the youngest lady legislator of Congress during her first term at 26. In 2015, Sarah became a nominee as president of the largest network of student governments, the National Union of Students of the Philippines, and led forming the Rise for Education Alliance. As principal author of Comprehensive Free Public Higher Education Bill in 2017, she worked alongside R4E in pushing for passage of a landmark law benefiting around 2 million college students each year since 2018. The representation's legislative agenda include education, health, well-being, gender equality, good governance, employment, and socioeconomic reforms for people's welfare, and thus far, garnering more victories as one of the principal authors of the Free Public Internet Access Law in 2017. Currently on her second term and part of the 12 House committees, She is youngest of the Board of Trustees of the Philippine Legislators Committee on Population and Development and a member of the ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights and serves as ambassador for various nonprofit organizations. Before Congress, Sarah, managing stuttering ever since, is founding president of a support group for and by people with stutter. Let's welcome Congresswoman Sarah Elago. Good afternoon. Yes, good afternoon, Sarah.
Hello, good afternoon, Jervis. Hello, everyone. I am Sarah Elago. I'm representing Kabataan Party List in the 18th Congress. It's the sole youth party list representation. I'm committed to advancing the Filipino youth and people's agenda. First and foremost, I would like to extend my greetings of solidarity to all in these trying times. Thank you, Global Shapers of Community Manila Hub, the United Nations Youth Advisory Board in the Philippines, and all partner councils, organizations, and formations for having me in this social conversation. Can we have the presentation on screen now? All right. Despite wide opposition, no, just the facts on this later. The anti-terror bill was signed into law yesterday, on a day when the Philippines also recorded an all-time high number, about 40,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19, and backlog in testing of about 16,194 samples per day as of July 1, 2020, has thus far prompted the filing of a petition before the Supreme Court to call to uphold the right to health and conduct a comprehensive, effective, democratic, humane, and participatory approach to the COVID-19 response. Next slide, please. This alone speaks volumes about the administration's priorities. There have been a number of measures filed before Congress to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic and its overall impact on the economy, our people's lives, and the future of young Filipinos, but all are still pending deliberation or passage from the mass testing bill that's pending before the House of Representatives, the anti-discrimination and stigma surrounding COVID-19 bill, to the various economic stimulus bills. Next slide. Next, please. But none of these were certified urgent, unlike the anti-terrorism bill, which was certified urgent in May, fast-tracking its passage, which would otherwise be impossible without the president's certification. So we've seen the various calls of the people, students, and youth to not only for mass testing, strengthened contact tracing, and a guarantee of free treatment to all COVID-19 patients. But instead of responding to these calls, we've seen how a law that's supposed to be in response for the COVID-19 pandemic has also been used to silence criticism and dissent. Nagkaroon po ng mga pag-aresto ng mga karaniwan nating mga kababayan na nagpapahayag ng kanilang loobin sa social media, gayon din po sa iba't ibang mga plataforma kung saan anong May 1, we've experienced volunteers in relief work na nagsalita po tungkol sa mga pangangailangan nila sa pangkalusugan, ganun din sa socio-economic reforms. Let's go back to the screen, please. So here are the pending bills related to the COVID-19 pandemic response. Okay, from the mass testing, anti-discrimination, the Better Normal Bill, which we supported and had the young people and students assert for a more humane approach towards a just transition emerging from this crisis. So, andyan din yung economic stimulus, lalong-lalo na sa mga kabataan. Daan-daang libo po ang mga nag-graduate ngayong kakatapos na academic year at maraming nababahala pagdating sa trabaho. Dahil yung mismong mga employed, bago pa lang yung COVID-19, ay marami pong nawalan din ng trabaho. Milyon-milyon po yan dito pa lang sa bansa, gayon din sa ating mga displaced OFWs. And so, we have to ask, no, what makes the anti-terror bill now a law, no, more urgent than focusing on the public health crisis and ramping up efforts to save and protect lives and our well-being? Perhaps no, it is the very answer to this critical question that has polarized our people as we grapple with worsening hunger and poverty, aggravated by the economic fallout due to the pandemic. The anti-terror law has further divided us at the height of a public health crisis when solidarity is what we need the most. As a firm believer of the power of information and dialogue, I believe that these conversations can lead to building bridges. And so I must start with sharing, no, from our perspective as a youth party list representative, why the youth are choosing to speak up on this issue. It's primarily because of the context of the human rights landscape in the Philippines, a matter of gravest concern to the Filipino youth and the people. More than the fear of abuse, there are facts about abuse that are met with injustice and without accountability. There is a huge basis why our strong reservations are legitimate. On June 4 this year, the UN Human Rights Office published its report, which was mandated by a Human Rights Council resolution, noting that many of the human rights concerns it has documented in the Philippines are, and I quote, long-standing but have become more acute in recent years. The report further stated that while there have been important human rights gains in recent years, particularly in economic and social rights, the underpinning focus on national security threats, real and inflated, has led to serious human rights violations, reinforced by harmful rhetoric from high-level officials. This focus has permeated the implementation of existing laws and policies and the adoption of new measures, often at the expense of human rights, due process rights, and the rule of law and accountability. Next slide, please. Nababahala po ang mga kabataan na bagamat wala pong dapat ikatakot kung di ka naman terorista. Ngunit ang karanasan po natin sa drug war ay naging madugo. Nasa 122 mga bata at children na deliberately or unintentionally were killed in the drug war. At ito po ang isa sa mga pangunahing nilalaman ng agenda ng mga kabataan sa loob ng Kongreso, ang pagtugon sa mga hamon sa ating karapatang pantao na siya rin po nagiging dahilan. Nag-fuel pa ito ng mas maraming injustisya sa ating bayan at ito ngang kawalang kaparusahan. Bukod po dyan, nireport din po na nasa 8,000 yung mga tao po na napatay sa drug war. At wini-welcome po natin, nagkaroon po ng sagot dito agad ang Department of Justice na sila ay gagawa ng isang interagency panel. At yan po ay mahigpit na babantayan ng mga kabataan dahil noong 2016 pa lamang po, nung nagsimula na yung mga pamamaslang na pinapaimbestigahan po natin na may kinalaman sa gera kontra droga, sinasabi na po sa atin na may mananagot. Ngunit 1 o 2 kaso pa lamang po ang may resolusyon pagdating sa mga deaths under investigation na kaugnay ng drug war. At isa pong ito sa mga cause of grave concern sa ating mga kabataan. Kung bakit hindi lamang tayo takot na may abuso, kundi dahil meron na pong mga nangyayaring abuso. Bukod po dyan, the UN also reported that there are at least 248 human rights defenders, legal professionals, journalists, and trade unionists have been killed in relation to their work. So makikita po dito, hindi lamang po ito nagsimula sa kasalukuyan po na administration, kundi nga matagal na. Ngunit nagkukos po talaga ng alarm yung mas dumadami pa ng mga kaso na ating hinahawakan. Next slide, please. Ang mga ito po ay nakasampa rin no, sa harap ng Committee on Human Rights sa loob ng House of Representatives at nagpapasalamat po tayo sa mga kabataan na patuloy ang lobbying no, para matugunan ang mga kaso na ito. Bukod pa sa pagpunta sa korte, ay ang pagtitiyak din na yung mga batas po natin malinaw no, na may pananagutan at ang mga nanagot ay may kaparusahan. Kasama rin po sa report no, yung phenomenon ng red tagging o yung labeling ng individuals, ng grupo. Kasama po ang mga human rights defenders at mga NGOs as communist or terrorist. No, that has posed a serious threat to civil society and freedom of expression. Ito po yung isa sa kinababahala natin dun sa designation ng mga terrorist. No? Kasi ngayon pa lamang, yung mga very vocal dissenters at mga critics po no, ng mga patakaran po ng ating pamahalaan at malayang nagpapahayag ng kanilang mga saloobin ay binabansagan ng mga terorista. No, kaya paano pa po kaya no, kapag naipasa at ito ngang naipasa na ang anti-terror law. In relation to that, no, there have been a report that about 251 of those red tags no, have experienced a threat, harassment, and intimidation. And worse po, yung killings. Isa po sa pinakahuli dyan ay ang Bayan Muna Coordinator sa Iloilo. Isa po itong community kitchen leader. At siya po ay nakaranas din ng iba't ibang tipo ng red tagging bilang isang matagal ng aktivista. At siya po ay naging biktima ng pamamaslang. Tayo ay nananawagan ng hustisya para kay Jory Porquia at lahat po ng mga kaso na nakatala dyan. Next slide, please. Ilan po sa mga nabahagi dyan ay ang tumitindi na atake sa media, ang panggigipit po sa mga naghahatid ng balita at impormasyon, gayon din ang mga dokumentadong ulat ng mga human rights abuses ng mga non-state actors, kasama na po ang New People's Army at iba pang mga rebel groups. Gayon din ang mga rekomendasyon no, ng UN hinggil sa mga tao na nababansagan no, bilang mga, kung hindi man terorista, ay mga sympathizers ng mga terrorist. Wag po natin yan payagan no, dahil ang mga salita ay napakamakapangyarihan at bilang din mga public officials na kinakailangan na maging mapag-ingat tayo pagdating sa lahat ng mga pahayag. No, kaya ito pong UN Human Rights Report na ito ay pagsilip lamang doon sa mga nararanasan ngayon ng mga kabataan at ng ating kababayan. Bukod po sa nakasaad na dyan, no, hinikayat ko pong lahat na mabasa yan at maging subject pa ng mga mas maraming webinars no, dahil sa haba, no, pero napakaganda ng mga rekomendasyon na pwede nating pagtulungan at nagpapakita lang na kung pagtutulungan natin itong mga issues na ito, marami po tayong maaaring maabot. Sa parte po ng mga kabataan, natala din natin yung lawfare o yung paggamit po mismo ng mga batas para patahimikin ang dissent, ang protest at ang mga kritiko. Isa po diyang halimbawa ay yung mga baseless na sedition charges na sinampa sa mga naging kandidato ng opposition noong 2019 elections. Kasama po dyan si Vice President Lenny, ngunit nabasura din po no, dahil wala naman talagang batayan. Gayon din yung mga kaso, mas dumarami po ngayon yung mga kaso ng illegal arrest. Katulad lamang po nung salesman sa Mindanao na siya pong inaresto dahil sa kanyang pinahayag na saloobin tungkol sa patakaran na may kinalaman sa COVID-19. Gayon din po yung OFW sa Taiwan na tinangkapong mapabalik dito sa ating bansa. Ngunit ang Taiwan government po mismo ang tumindig din, no, kasama siya na nagsabi na ang ating pong mga OFWs, ang ating mga migrant workers, hindi po nila hinuhubad ang kanilang mga fundamental freedoms, ang kanilang basic civil liberties, no, kapag po sila ay nagtatrabaho abroad. So now, no, next slide please. kabahagi po ng pag-address ng mga issues sa human rights ay ang paggamit din po ng gabay no, ng Security Council resolution no, ng United Nations hinggil sa bahagi ng mga kabataan sa pag-abot ng kapayapaan at ng seguridad sa ating bayan. At kasama po sa 5 pillars niyan ay yung partisipasyon, protection, prevention, partnership, disengagement, at saka reintegration. No, kaya po sa atin, hindi magaan na usapin itong pag-repeal ng Human Security Act at mamadali no, sa pagpasa nitong bagong anti-terror law. Kasi napakarami pa pong mga pag-aaral na kailangan gawin, no? At sagutin yung tanong na sa kabila ng meron na tayong batas laban sa terorismo, bakit po nagpatuloy pa rin no, yung mga kaso ng terorismo sa ating bayan. Nitong 2016 din po hanggang ngayon, nakita natin ang mga batas na sumusuporta pagdating sa pagpapalakas ng ating security sector. Dinoble po ang salaries ng ating uniformed men. Gayon din tumaas po ng by fourfold, no? At higit pa yung intelligence and contingency funds na maaari pong gamitin no, para sa peace and security efforts ng ating bayan. Kaya kaugnay niyan ay ang sunod na concern po ng kabataan ay may kinalaman sa mabuting pamamahala, no, good governance. Paano ba natin tinitiyak na yung mga pondo ng ating bayan ay napupunta talaga para dun sa kanyang layunin na magawa? No, halimbawa po, no, may kakaroon ng suporta doon sa security sector dahil inaasahan po natin ang mabuti maayos na tungkulin at trabaho, no? Ngunit ang NEDA na po mismo ang nag-ulat, no, kung bibisitahin natin ang kanilang good governance website, nito pong sa ating mga pinakahuling indicators, next slide please. So Worldwide Governance Indicators 2018, tayo po ay may pagtaas sa government effectiveness at sa regulatory quality, mainly due to the passage of the Ease of Doing Business Act. But meron po tayong pagbaba pagdating sa indicator ng voice and accountability, control of corruption at rule of law. Sunod sa Global Competitiveness Index, bumaba po tayo sa overall ranking ng 8 pwesto. Pagdating naman sa Open Budget Index, meron pong pagtaas, no? Kaya ito ay dapat i-grab ng mga kabataan, no? Meron tayong mga available resources para talagang maging mapagmatsyag at mapuspos yung ating partisipasyon no, sa pampublikong proseso ng pamamahala. Ngunit isa po natin kailangan tignan itong pagbaba natin sa World Justice Project Rule of Law Index na sinasabi po sa kabuang report na ang malaki pong factors no, kung bakit po tayo dyan bumaba ay dahil sa Marawi siege na tumagal ng hanggang 5 months at magpasa hanggang ngayon po, no, marami pa pong issues na hindi natutugunan. Halimbawa ay yung mismong pagbabalik po ng ating mga kababayan sa kanilang mga tirahan at yung ligtas no, na pagbibigay ng suporta sa kabuhayan no, at sa iba pang pangangailangan socio-ekonomiko ng ating mga kababayan. Nabanggit din po dito ang tungkol sa drug war. Sa Corruption Perceptions Index naman po, bumaba tayo ng 14 no, na pwesto. Kaya ito pong inuunugan ng mga kondisyon no, kung bakit ang naging focus po sana natin, no, kabahagi ng paglaban sa terorismo at sa iba pang mga abuso sa karapatang pantao ay yung highlight na measures on good governance and youth empowerment. Next slide please. Yung pagpapasa po ng batas hinggil sa pagpo-prohibit ng establishment ng political dynasties, pag-ensure ng freedom of information, pagbabawal sa lahat ng tipo ng pork funds, kaugnay din po yung youth empowerment, no? Yung pagtitiyak na hindi lang token yung participation po natin sa lamesa, no? Kundi tayo po ay hindi lang pinapakinggan, no? Kundi ginagamit talaga yung boses natin no? Para hubugin yung mga palisiya at yung mga batas na pinapatupad sa ating bayan. Katulad po ng ginawa natin ngayon no, sa COVID-19 pandemic, kung gaano po tayo nagigiit ng panawagan ng ating mga kababayan. Ngunit imbes po na pakinggan ang ating 7-point demands, next slide please, naipasa po ang anti-terror law, no, nauna pang maipasa, no, bago pa ma-extend yung Bayanihan to Heal as One Act. No. May nakasalang na po na BARO 2, o yung Bayanihan 2, o BARO, Bayanihan to Recover as One. Ngunit nauna pa po itong maipasa, ilan pong misconception, no? Sabi po matagal na ito na pinapakinggan no, sa loob ng Kongreso, ngunit alalahanin po natin na kakatapos po ng 2019 elections, halos 1/3 ng miyembro ng House of Representatives po ngayon ay bago no, sa kapulungan, kaya hindi po yun maaaring gamitin no, na isang pantulak no, sa effort na ito na gawing batas na magkaroon ng bagong anti-terror law. Next slide, please. Kung sa House po,
Sarah, can we wrap up in 3 minutes because our time is limited.
Okay. Next slide, please. Ito po yung pinagdaanan sa loob ng House. Next slide. Nagkaroon po tayo ng mga pagpupulong, imbitado ang iba't ibang mga sektor. Doon po sa current bill, meron po tayong mga natanggal no, na mga punto. Ngunit ang natin dito, ang nangyari nitong last week ng May ay inadopt na lamang ang Senate version at naisawalang bahala no, yung version no, na pinaghirapan ng House of Representatives na nagtulak din sa atin no, para mag-aral pa ng mga hindi pa resolbadong mga kaso na kaugnay ng Human Security Act. At tayo po ay sumusuporta no, dun sa paglaban sa terorismo. Ngunit at hindi pinapaalalahanan na kailangan po natin na tiyakin na ito ay hindi labag no, sa ating saligang batas dahil ilan po sa mga issues na naging dahilan kung bakit tayo tumututol. Unang-una ay ang pagpapalawak, ang expansion ng definition ng terrorism sa Section 4. Kung dati po kinakailangan ng predicate crimes, malinaw po yan, murder at iba pa pong nakalista sa Human Security Act. Ngayon po, kung titignan natin ang wording, nakalagay na lamang dito, engages in acts intended to cause death or serious bodily injury. Ngayon po, hindi na nagmamatter kung ano man yung act na ginawa, no? Ano man ang na-commit no, na act. Pero ang mas pwede pong magpanagot sa isang tao ay yung intensyon. Ang tanong, sino po ang mag-desisyon tungkol dun sa intensyon? No? Kung layunin nga ba no, ng iyong ginawa ay para po mag-cause ng death or ng bodily injury. Bagamat may nakalagay po dito na maaari ang conduct ng mga protesta at ng iba pa pong mass action, stoppage of work at dissent, nababahala po tayo dun sa kadugtong no, na phrase na which are not intended. Nandiyan na naman po yung intention. Dito ka lang po na nakakita na ang intent no, is penalized. Kaya maging po ang mga speeches, no, itong ating mga diskusyon, no, at iba po pong mga protest action, maaari pong sabihin na, hindi, yung intent o yung purpose niyan ay ganito, kahit po hindi naman. No, kaya we need not actually do much no, to fall under the purview of what's being criminalized under the anti-terror law. Pinalawig din po ang maaaring parusahan mula nga dun sa threat to commit terrorism, planning, training, preparing and facilitating the commission of terrorism na aabot mula sa 12 years no, hanggang sa habang buhay na pagkulong. Gayon din ang conspiracy to commit, a proposal, inciting. Sa salita nga po ng isa sa mga tumutol no, sa pagpasa ng batas na ito, si Deputy Speaker Hataman, mas concerned pa sa kung sino yung mas ituring no, ng mga terorista kaysa yung mismong labanan ang terorismo at ang mga pinagmumulan nito. Ano ba yung mga conducive factors na nag-contribute no, dun sa pagkakaroon ng terorismo sa isang bayan. Andyan din po ang pagpo-provide ng material support, no? Kaya maski ang business sector ay tumutol dito, humanitarian exemption, na dapat po impartial, no? Hindi po yung sa nature ng humanitarian na response, no? Kinakailangan na i-welcome natin, no, lahat ng humanitarian efforts, no, pantulong sa emergency response.
Kung
Dati
Sarah,
rin po, no, sa Human
sorry kung
Security
Sarah,
Act,
I'm sorry. Hello, kung
ayan,
Sarah.
just 2 points. Just 2 points.
Yes, sure. Last points.
Okay po. Ito po, dati sa Human Security Act, no, after publication, required na Section 15 po, no, penalty for public official, may perpetual absolute disqualification. Dati sa Human Security Act, ito po ay suspendido 1 month before and 2 months after holding the election. No? Ngunit tinanggal na po yan sa ilalim ng anti-terror law. Kaya nababahala po tayo na ito po ay maaaring gamitin, no, laban sa mga political opponents o ganun din sa opposition. At pinakahuli, no, isa po sa mga dahilan kung bakit marami dito tumututol ay yung longer pre-trial detention na 8 beses na mas mabagsik doon sa pinapayagan lamang ng ating konstitusyon at napakalapit na po doon sa maximum penalty para sa minor crimes. Kaya maski po ikaw ay ma-detain, no, maximum ng 24 days, para ka na, yan po ay parusa na in itself. No? Kaya po talaga, tinututulan natin, bukod pa doon sa ito ay grossly violative, no, of our basic civil liberties. Kaya nakita natin kung gaano nagsalita ang iba't nilang boto, nag-clarify ng kanilang boto, at sa iba't ibang sectors, hindi lang sa youth and students, business, academic institutions, at gayon din po sa mga negosyo, lawyers groups, at ang mga legal luminaries po natin. Kaya ang mga kabataan po ay naninindigan at nananawagan ng junk terror law, kalusugan, kabuhayan at karapatan. Let's continue to fight abuse and tyranny, and let's defend human rights. Thank you and good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Sara Ilago. That was so insightful. Dahil alam naman natin na yung kabataan talaga may major stake siya dito sa anti-terror law na nilagdaan nga ng ating Pangulo. So we'll be having a question and answer portion. Marami ng mga tanong dito ang ating mga kabataan. But I think, of course, let's start with the elephant in the room. One of the biggest oppositions dito sa anti-terror law is that it can be weaponized to dissent, to stifle dissent, or no, to be something against yung mga taong nag-oppose ng government. So question kay Commissioner Ryan Enriquez, how do we make sure first na hindi ito magagamit laban sa demokrasya natin?
Oo. Jervis, marami mga safeguards tong ating batas compared dun sa Human Security Act. And for example, meron tayong nahuling isang terorista, kailangan i-report natin ito agad sa pinakamalapit na huwes, and kailangan inform natin agad yung pinakamalapit na Commission on Human Rights, at hindi mo pwede ipagpabukas to, kailangan gumawa ka ng letter kung ikaw ay isang police or militar na nakahuli na isang terorista, kailangan i-report mo siya agad. Kasi kung hindi, makakasuhan yung police o militar sa hindi niya pag-report sa hinihinalang isang terorista. Kaya yung mga safeguards nandito lahat. At pag mayroong ginawa ang police o militar na hindi niya ni-report yung kanyang nahuling terorista, mananagot po yung isang police at militar sa batas at meron siyang perpetual disqualification. At hindi talagang may kulong pa yon, hindi lang siya madi-disqualified. Kaya yung safeguard itong batas na ito ay sa palagay ko ay nandyan na, inilagay na lahat, at wala pong dapat alalahanin ang ating mga kabataan.
Jervis, may I just add a response
Sure.
to that question? Yes,
Sure.
po. tinanggal po yung penalty na 500,000 per day para dun sa mga law enforcers po natin na magkakaroon ng pagkakamali no, dun sa kanilang ginagawang hakbang. Again, no, we have ramped up funding no, for intelligence and contingency intelligence and confidential expenses. No, we've doubled the salaries of our uniformed personnel. No, we've even had efforts no, to have cleansing among and within no, the security sector para po matiyak na sila ay magsisilbi at magpoprotekta sa ating mga kababayan. No? Ngunit despite all these, we're gravely concerned about the report of the 450 who died under police custody. No? So hanggang ngayon po walang malinaw no? Yung mga dahilan no? Kung bakit ganito po karami yung namamatay po sa kustodiya ng ating mga kapulisan. Kaya kasabay po nung aming panawagan para sa karapatang pantao ay yung pagtitiyak po na walang abuso at orientation talaga pagdating sa pagtatanggol sa karapatang pantao habang nilalabanan po natin ang krimen sa ating bansa.
Jervis, pwede ko sagutin?
Yes. Yes, quickly, sir, before we proceed to the other questions.
Yung tungkol sa 500,000 na sinasabi ni Congressman Sara, which is yun yung nagiging dahilan kung bakit nagiging dead letter law tong Human Security Act of 2007. Dahil alam nyo, kagaya ng actual na nangyayari sa atin ngayon, merong 80 abusayap ang nahuli. And 60 doon ang na-convict, 20 doon ang na-acquit. Imagine mo, Jervis, kung yung 20 na na-acquit na yon, ikaw yung nakahuli, Jervis, magbabayad ka ng 500,000 a day doon sa isang na-acquit. So, kung 500 sa 20 na-acquit, magbabayad ka ng 10 million a day. Kung ilang taon niya na dinulog, ay for sure maghihirap ka talaga. At hindi naman ang gobyerno ang magbabayad ng 500,000 a day, kundi po yung mismong pulis ang nahuli. For example, si Congressman Sara Ilago, kunwari siya ay police at nakahuli siya, kunwari siya naging nangyari sa kanya ay si Wonder Woman at nahuli niya yung 80 abusayap na hinihinala natin at yung 20 doon ay na-acquit. So si Congressman Sara bilang isang police, siya yung mismong magbabayad nito at sa palagay ko ito ay parang nagpoprotekta ito sa mga terorista, hindi ito nagpoprotekta sa mga kabataang Pilipino at sa mga Pilipino.
Okay, sir. Marami pa tayong insights about this topic, but I think we have to proceed to some of the questions posed by people who are viewing us right now. The first question po, paano makakasiguro na ang mahuhuli ay lehitimong terorista? At kapag ba nagkamali ang pulis at sundalo, ang NYC ba ang unang magrereklamo? Ito po ay question mula kay Voltaire Zizek. Sir, Commissioner, your answer, your thoughts, please.
Yes, ang NYC naman po ay kami po ang boses ng mga may ayaw at hindi sa ating gobyerno. Kami po ay magsasabi at kung meron po kaming nakikita mga polisiya o ginagawa na hindi po maganda, ang pagsaserban po natin ay mga kabataang Pilipino. At wag pong mag-alala ang ating mga kabataan at ito pong batas na ito ay para sa atin. At ito po ay magpoprotekta sa ating pong mga kabataan, lalo na po napakadelikado at 50 years na kasi itong problema natin sa terrorism. So talagang hindi na po siya makatarungan at marami na pong mga magulang na nawawalan ng anak dahil po sa pagre-recruit ng mga terorista. At ito pong National Task Force to End Local Communists ay ginagawa po natin para at least ay matigil na ang terrorism matapos na po yung mga NPA.
Okay, Commissioner, we have a follow-up question on that. The second question is asking you na sabi nyo kanina mga kabataang naglalayong tapusin ang komunismo sa bansa. So does this mean that the NYC and the government treats communists as terrorists? O isa lang, o magkaiba ba ang pagtingin ng NYC sa mga komunista at sa mga terorista?
Komunista at terorista, isa lang naman siya. So talagang ito ay dinadanaw namin sa National Information yung mga CPP, NPA na to na dapat matapos na.
I think, Commissioner, kasi doon ang gagaling yung takot ng maraming tao because ang dali-dali. I mean, this law is making it very easy for the government to tag anyone as communist or as terrorist. Kasi konting pag-rally mo lang, konting pag-oppose mo lang, pwede ka nang mahuli, no? So, ito yung sinasabi natin eh. This is the core of the opposition of many sectors around. So, if you are saying that communists are same as terrorists, so we are expecting to the number ng mahuhuli would blow up, especially kapag in effect na itong batas na ito.
No, basta ang activism is not terrorism. Ang nangyayari lang kasi sa atin ngayon, may mga aktivista na iilan na talagang miyembro ng mga nagiging terorista. Yun yung mga nagre-recruit at sila yung mga mismong nagiging stepping stone nila para umakyat ng bundok. Kaya ito yung mga iniingatan natin at nahalo at nadadama yung mga aktivista natin kasi hindi naman masama maging aktivista eh. Kaya wag po tayo mag-aalala sa mga ibang aktivista na nagpapakita lang ng kanilang advokasya, yung protest, dissent, yung stoppage of work, industrial mass action, civil or political rights, or kahit ano pa man, hindi po ang terrorism po ay hindi stand-alone evidence na pwede tayong magturo na lang ng kung sino po ang terorista. At ito po ay maliwanag po sa batas ng Anti-Terrorism Bill.
Pero sir, ito question lang, hypothetically, kasi one of the provisions of this law is saying na if you are destroying government property, you can be considered as terrorists. What if may isang rally at yung some of the people there ay nagvandalize ng isang let's say a government property, a wall or something? Can they be considered a terrorist under this law?
No, Jervis, iba ang kaso niya. Kung vandalism ang kanyang ginawa, meron tayong batas para sa vandalism, hindi siya terrorism. Kaya wala pong dapat.
So we are saying na ang mga nag-rally, ang mga nag-oppose sa gobyerno ay hindi sila huhulihin ever at kapag nahuli sila, NYC will be on the forefront para
Maliwanag naman, Jervis. Ang terrorism ay pagkipil ng maraming buhay at pagsira ng maraming kagamitan. At yung pagrarally ng mga kabataan ay hindi po ito sakop. Kahit ano pong sabihin na laban sa ating gobyerno, kahit murahin niyo po ang ating gobyerno, hindi po kayo matatag as terrorism. Pero kung ikaw ay isang aktivista at sinasabi mo na at nanghihikayat ka na pabagsakin na natin tong gobyerno na to, mag-recruit na tayo ng mga kabataan para labanan ng ating gobyerno at babagsakin na natin, siguro doon papasok ang anti-terrorism law.
Okay. Sige, sir. Let's proceed to the next
May I
question.
comment, Jervis?
Sure. Congresswoman Sarah, you have a comment.
I would just like to remind our chair of the NYC that the anti-subversion law has long been repealed, no? 1992 pa lamang. So, hindi nyo po pwedeng i-equate yung communism vis-a-vis terrorism, because that would really send a chilling effect and would bring the whole civil society exercising their democratic and political rights under general suspicion. Parang ngayon, mag-iisip ka na twice, gagawin ko ba to o hindi, sasabihin ko ba to o hindi, dahil may panganib na ako ay makulong. Halimbawa na lang, yung salesman nga po na hinuli dahil sa kanyang pinost sa Facebook. Kahit pa siya po ay hindi nakasuhan ng mga mabibigat na kaso na may kinalaman sa terorismo, pero yung mismong impact ng arestuhin ka at makulong ay napakabigat po nun sa ating mga kababayan. It will restrict our liberty, it will restrict our thought, and it would further threaten our basic fundamental freedoms.
Okay, sige po. Sorry, but maybe proceed na to the next question. Panelists, why is it important to amend the Human Security Act of 2007? Anyone could answer po? Commissioner, Congresswoman, yes, Commissioner.
Let's again.
Why is it important to amend the Human Security Act of 2007?
Okay, yung sinabi ko kanina, ang Human Security Act of 2007, talagang napakahina siya. At kung may kukumpara natin ito ay talagang parang ito ay ang batas na nagpoprotekta hindi po sa mga kabataan, hindi sa Pilipino, kundi po sa mga terorista. Dahil ang dami po ditong mga provision na nagbibigay ng parang lakas ng loob para sa mga terorista na pamahayan ng ating bansang Pilipinas. Dahil
Yes po.
at ito pong ating batas ay talagang napakahina kumpara po sa ibang bansa. Alam niyo po yung ating pinaggayahan na lang nitong batas natin, yung Australia, yung Sri Lanka, parehas natin 14 days yung pag-aresto. Yung Bangladesh, 15 days. Yung Indonesia, 21 days. Yung Pakistan, 30 days. Yung Malaysia, 59 days. Yung Singapore, 730 days. At gusto natin na hindi tayo maging terrorist haven dahil sinabihan na tayo ng European Council, European United Nations Council na palakasin natin ang anti-terrorism bill natin dahil nakakatakot ito at number 9 na nga tayo sa buong mundo at aantayin pa ba natin mag number 1 tayo bago tayo umaksyon. At yun po.
Okay, Congresswoman Sara, you have an answer to that?
Yes, Jervis, no, hindi natin kailangan ng bagong anti-terror law. May batas na tayo laban sa terorismo. Ang kailangan natin mas malakas, mabagsik na sistema ng hustisya kung saan walang kinikilala at walang mas nananahimik sa ating batas. Ang pagtitiyak na we're able to address and pursue judicial reforms and address gaps in uneven handling of cases. Dapat po yung equal protection at yung karapatan ng bawat isa, yung pantay na karapatan at proteksyon sa ating batas. Pagkakaroon ng due process ay ating bantayan at patuloy na protektahan. Ang kailangan po natin ngayon ay tiyakin na may certainty ng punishment kahit sobrang bigat pa po ng parusa natin sa ating mga kababayan. Ngunit kung uneven naman po, unequal yung ating pagpapatupad, ayan po talaga ay mas mag-encourage pa ng mas maraming paglabag sa ating batas. Kaya bigyan natin ng prioridad ang pagpapalakas ng sistema ng hustisya sa ating bayan.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Next question natin, why is the administration more focused in silencing its critics instead of beating the virus which has already killed thousands and made a lot of our fellow countrymen unemployed? So bakit daw po mas nakafocus ang gobyerno sa pagpapatahimik ng mga kritiko sa halip na pagtuunan ng pansin ang COVID-19? Commissioner.
Tuloy-tuloy naman ang paggawa ng ating batas ng mga congressman, ng ating mga senators. At 50 years na nga sinasabi ko kanina, hindi naman pwedeng baliwalain natin tong anti-terrorism bill at mag-focus tayo sa COVID pandemic. Dapat umandar pa rin ang buhay ng tao. Dahil ang CPP-NPA nga ay 50 years na sana ay prioridad po ng ating Pangulo na matapos na po ang terrorism sa ating bansa at maging safe po yung ating mga kabataan.
Okay, Congresswoman Sara.
My presentation earlier on the pending measures related to the COVID-19 pandemic response and recovery plan says it all. None of these were certified urgent. At hangad natin kasi tatawagan na po tayo para sa isang special session for the upcoming week or bago man mag-SONA. Tinatawagan ko po ang mga kabataan na patuloy po tayong maging mapagmatsyag at pag-aralan po natin kung paano makakapagpasa ng isang recovery plan na uunahin po ang bailout ng mga nawalan ng trabaho at lahat po ng nangangailangan sa panahon na ito.
Okay, maraming salamat, Congresswoman Sara. Ang dami-daming mga questions na nagpop up dito sa ating comments from our Facebook and YouTube Live. But we have to proceed to our other speakers. So maraming salamat po, Commissioner Enriquez and Congresswoman Sara for giving us your time. At salamat sa inyong insight sa pag-discuss nitong very controversial na anti-terror law na ito. So sa point po na ito, we'll be proceeding to the next panel kung saan pag-uusapan man po natin yung mga sectoral impact of the anti-terror law sa iba't ibang sectors. I mean, madaming effect ito sa usapin ng kapayapaan, sa usapin ng ekonomiya, and we have with us speakers that would discuss further, would give us more points about give us more insight dito sa usapin nga ng anti-terror law na ito. At ang makakasama natin, kasama dyan si Dr. Jovar Pantao. Siya ay coordinator ng Institute for Peace and Development ng Mindanao State University. At sina Ms. Colleen Awit, Officer in Charge ng Youth Empowering Youth Initiative, pati na si Sir John Carlo Punongbayan, Teaching Fellow ng UP School of Economics. So later on, I'll be introducing them at length, pero makakasama pa rin natin naman, pwede pa naman magstay sina Congresswoman Sara at si Commissioner Riot Enriquez. So, isa-isahin na natin yung ating mga bigating speakers for this afternoon. Dr. Jovar Pantao is a Magindanaoan Ilonggo Peace Education Advocate in Mindanao. His career in education is integrated with peace advocacies. And as a peace advocate, he leads several trainings on culture of peace and peace education for teachers, youth administrators, supervisors, and local officials using his authored module, Tudlo Kalilintad, Teach Peace. In 2006, he served as a mentor of the former MNLF combatants in mobilizing the community members for peace and development. His research interests focus on navigating the potential of education as a platform in promoting peace and building resilience against extreme violence. And he was recognized as the United Nations Association of Philippines Outstanding Youth Leadership Award in 2009 and the UNESCO Outstanding Educator of the Philippines 2017. Currently, he works as a faculty of Mindanao State University in General Santos and a coordinator of the Institute of Peace and Development in Mindanao. Introduce na natin lahat para tuloy-tuloy na tayo mamaya. Ms. Colleen Awit naman is currently taking up a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering at the University of St. Lasal in Bacolod. Ms. Awit is at present Officer in Charge of the Youth Empowering Youth Initiative, an NGO that advocates for education, environmental conservation, and most importantly, youth empowerment. Presently, she is the Secretary of the Department of Advocacy Programs of University Student Government, a Negros Sanon youth leader, and a member of Youth for Climate Hope and the Co-3 Negros movement. Apart from her involvement as a student leader, she is also a renewable energy ambassador of Reboot Philippines. She also spends most of her time working closely with other youth groups in promoting youth empowerment and just renewable transition in the province of Negros as an advocate of climate action and clean energy. And lastly, we have Sir John Carlo Punongbayan. He is a PhD candidate and teaching fellow at the UP School of Economics. His professional experience comprises the Securities and Exchange Commission, the World Bank Office in Manila, the FEU Public Policy Center, and the National Economic and Development Authority. JC writes a weekly economics column for Rappler.com, and he is also co-founder of UsapangEcon.com and co-host of Usapang Econ podcast. So welcome to our discussion, JC, Colleen, and Dr. Jovar. First, we'll give you 5 minutes to present ano nga bang ang impact ng anti-terror law sa inyong mga field. Let's start with Dr. Jovar.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Foremost, I would like to acknowledge the good intention of our legislators and leaders for enacting counterterrorism policies. I believe that the ATL was passed with the intention of supporting the justice system of the country. Just like many of us, our leaders and legislators are concerned about life, liberty, and protection of the people. Nevertheless, this law was designed to facilitate counter-terrorism efforts that are bound to protect the people. However, the purpose of this law will not come to realization if the implementers will not consider the vital elements of clarity, enforcement, and context. In terms of clarity, the broad and vague definition of terrorism in the law may facilitate confusion and misinterpretation among the people and the law enforcers. Also, the failure of the ATL to provide definition to the term incitement may be a threat to freedom of speech and expression. If not clarified, this may serve as fertile ground for conflicts and, if not handled well, violence. Moreover, the Act needs to deep dive into the continuum of violent extremism. If the law does not respond to the challenges and gaps in addressing the complex nature of VE phenomenon, it would probably defeat its intention to promote peace. Worse is that it would add to the mutually reinforcing drivers of extreme violence. On enforcement, the law is more likely punitive rather than positive. It basically focuses on identifying, capturing, and penalizing the terrorists. What is worrisome is that the law enforcers would continue to facilitate wrongful accusations and arrests, which many of the victims are minorities, like the Moro. If we fail to strengthen the law enforcement capacity in implementing the ATL, the law would most probably promote chaos rather than order and harmony. Nevertheless, our law enforcers' intelligence capacity needs improvement in order for us to respond well to the challenges of terrorism. Relative to context, the long history of discrimination of minorities still exists. Sadly, profiling of Moro Muslims are terrorists despite the many peace advocacy efforts. If there are Moro prisoners who were falsely accused as local terrorists before the implementation of ATL, what more now that the ATL relaxes the accountability of the law enforcement agents? If the implementation is not handled well, the law will be promotive of division instead of reconciliation among the Moro communities. In a survey administered by the Equal Access International and our Mindanao messaging hubs, which I am a part of, a substantial majority of respondents think that more human rights violations will occur under the implementation of ATL. Second, the poor enforcement of the ATL will result to more divisions among the people. Third, the law enforcers will have tendency to disrespect human rights. And fourth, there will still be struggle in realizing responsible and careful identification of suspected terrorists. Undoubtedly, there is no shortcut to peace and development. For this law to be effective, there is a need for us to ground ourselves on the principle of participation for greater good. Let us create more free platforms of expression and deliberation, considering the voices of different peace stakeholders, especially the voices of the main victims of terrorism. Let us consider the experiences from the peace builders and community leaders, not just the security sector. Right now, there is a need for us to review and revise or enhance some of the provisions of the ATL, not junk. I believe that our failure to consider the gaps would overrule the decades of peace-building efforts in Mindanao, whose principle, according to the Mindanao peace-building community, lie on ecumenism, do no harm, non-violence, accountability, and solidarity. Lastly, I hope that every Filipino citizen like me think and is supportive of a law that is holistic, encompassing, more respectful of freedom and human rights, and is consistent with the Constitution of the Philippines. Mabuhay po ang Pilipinas. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat po, Dr. Jovar. We understand na napakalaki na magiging impact nito anti-terror law na ito, especially sa Mindanao. But for now, let's hear it from Ms. Colleen sa kanyang discussion naman kung paano makakaapekto sa environment ang anti-terror law na ito. Ms. Colleen?
Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. So ako po si Awit from Youth for Climate Hope. So, kami po sa Youth for Climate Hope, we are a youth-led coalition na isa sa mga tumulong upang to keep Negros coal-free. And basically, we seek to achieve climate justice through different acts of hope. So, kami po ay mula sa Negros, and I want to extend my deepest gratitude to Global Shapers Manila for inviting me and having me today for social conversations. So, bago po ako magsimula into discussing the anti-terror law and its effects to our environmental defenders, tingnan po muna natin kung paano yung Pilipinas bilang isang bansa para sa ating mga environmental defenders. So even before this anti-terror law, noong 2019, according to research, yung Philippines is already dubbed as the most dangerous or the deadliest country for land and environmental defenders. Red tagging of progressive groups and labeling them as rebels, even without sufficient proof, is already happening. Many individuals and groups have been attacked. Even some of them were killed of trying to protect natural resources that a lot of communities depend on, or because of fighting against projects that are destructive to our environment. So among those who were victims were farmers who actually take up most of the percentage, and tribal and IP leaders, pati na rin yung mga civil society and community organizers. And yung Negros has been a witness to some of these injustices, human rights violations, state-perpetrated violence, and extrajudicial killings. Let us not forget about the Negros 14. They were the farmers who actively fought for their right to land. So this bill clearly blurs yung fine line between criticism and terrorism, and it tries to remove all the safe spaces that we can possibly have as advocates, conservationists, and campaigners. And it will definitely have an impact on the climate movement, and it can hinder campaigns, support, and initiatives, especially those that are done to vulnerable communities and marginalized communities. And kami sa Youth for Climate Hope, along with other youth organizations here in Negros Occidental, most of our demands were heard through nonviolent direct action, such as silent protests and climate strikes. Ang Coal-Free Negros ay naipanalo dahil alongside the consciousness raising efforts and mga policy lobbying din na ginagawa namin, we stood there every Wednesday in front of our provincial capital, ensuring that our demands are being heard. Through our protest movements, we were able to hold corporations and our leaders accountable. Ngayon, with the anti-terror law, it will definitely worsen yung abuses and attacks to our environmental defenders and our climate activists. This can be used against anyone, against any individual, or against any group who call out big corporations and those who oppose environmentally destructive projects, gaya namin dito sa Negros, wherein we oppose the proposed coal-fired power plant in San Carlos City. Furthermore, magagamit din ito to tolerate and even justify ang mga abuses, killings, arrests, and intimidation sa ating mga environmental defenders. Those who seek to block the work of environmental activists can easily classify what they do or their work as threats to national security. And pwede din ito, pwede din gamitin ng law na ito to legalize or even to fast-track yung mga projects that exploit communities and our natural resources and even the ancestral domains. With its vague and unconstitutional provisions, it can easily equate conservation efforts into terrorism. So, malaki talaga yung epekto ng anti-terror law on the climate movement and other conservation efforts. Ngayon, we are on a climate emergency, and we have seen a global movement. Different youth from different parts of the world have been joining climate strikes. Kasi nga, climate scientists say that we only have years left to combat the climate crisis. You see, no, at a time where our voices should be the loudest, we are being stifled. And at a time where we have to demand for accountability, the state chooses to cling to their power and threaten us. So, yun po. Maraming salamat.
Maraming salamat, Ms. Awit. So, kita natin na malaki talaga yung impact ng law, even the climate defenders and environmental activists can be vulnerable kapag naging effective na itong anti-terror law na ito. So before we proceed to the questions, we have another speaker, Sir JC Punungbayan, one of the most prominent economists right now, is here with us to discuss the impact of the anti-terror law sa businesses and economic development. Sir JC, you have the floor.
Okay, Jervis. Maraming salamat. Maraming salamat din sa Global Shapers Community Manila para sa imbitasyon. So siguro simulan natin dun sa economics of terrorism kasi yun yung at the heart of this issue. So I think wala namang magko-contest dun sa idea na kailangan nating sugpuin ang terorismo kasi obvious naman na meron talaga siyang mga negative economic impact sa negosyo at sa ekonomiya. Pero meron din mga pag-aaral kasi na nagpapakita na yung ugat kasi ng problema ng terorismo ay yung mga socio-economic factors tulad ng poverty, hunger, inequality, unemployment, tsaka yung kawalan din ng political rights. So hanggang hindi natin sinosolve itong mga root causes na ito, ay hindi natin pwedeng asahan na bigla na lang mawawala yung terorismo just because nilagay mo sa isang batas na bawal ang terorismo. Okay? Pero I think mas importante yung issue na bagamat merong ang problema ng terorismo, yung paraan, yung pagkakasulat nitong batas na ito ay masyadong broad. It's overbroad at disproportional dun sa problema na gusto niyang sugpuin. Marami na mga business groups na nagpahayag ng kanilang sentimiento, kabilang yung Makati Business Club, yung Philippine Management Association of the Philippines, etc. At sinasabi nila na ito daw, batas na ito ay clear and present danger to human rights. So pati yung mga negosyo ay tinitingnan nila itong batas na ito from the human rights perspective din. At sinasabi nila na tulad ng nabanggit ni Kong Sara kanina, hindi natin kailangan ng bagong batas kasi meron ng Human Security Act at kailangan lang paigtingin yung implementasyon ng nasabing batas. Yung pagkakasulat din, yung timing din itong batas na ito ay pinapakita yung misguided priorities ng gobyerno. Tulad ng nabanggit kanina, napakarami nating pressing socio-economic problems sa ngayon. Nandiyan yung pandemic, so meron that time dalawang kinakaharap na crisis ngayon, yung health crisis tsaka yung economic crisis. So nasa gitna tayo ng unang recession ng Pilipinas sa loob ng 2 dekada. Yung unemployment rate ay nasa all-time high. Yung mga negosyo ay unti-unti nang nagsasara at kailangan nila ng atensyon ng gobyerno. So yung timing ay mukhang off. And at the same time, yung mga negosyo ay concerned din na maglilikha ng uncertainty itong batas na ito, kaya nasa wait-and-see approach sila. So for example, may mga negosyo siguro hindi muna papasok sa negosyo or papasok mula sa ibang bansa dahil nakita nila na baka hindi safe ang Pilipinas bilang isang investment destination. At nakita nga natin sa mga nakalipas na buwan na si Pangulong Duterte ay inaatake din yung ibang mga negosyante tulad ng mga Ayalas, ni MDT, tsaka ng mga Lopezes, yung ABS-CBN for example. So, ganun. So, dumadagdag ito sa environment ng uncertainty na meron na yung mga negosyante natin. I think pwede din natin tignan yung kaso ng Hong Kong kasi in just the past week ay nilagdaan din ni Chinese President Xi Jinping yung National Security Act na maraming parallels dito sa anti-terrorism bill ni Pangulong Duterte. At yung mga businesses din sa Hong Kong of course we know ay isa sa mga major financial hubs ng mundo, kinakabahan din sila. Although may mga negosyo sa Hong Kong na ini-embrace yung ganong National Security Act, in fact may mga bagong mga investment sa mga nakalipas na linggo, ay sinasabi nila na baka konting pagkakamali lang ay yung mga negosyo ay baka pag-initan din sila ng gobyerno ng China. So kinakabahan din sila na yung smallest misstep nila ay baka magdulot ng mga penalties at fines at sa negosyo din. At kinakabahan din sila kasi marami siyang mga transactions from abroad and then meron din sila minsan ng mga donasyon tsaka financial support for certain organizations. So kinakabahan sila na baka may mga implications yun ngayon na meron na silang bagong national security law. And then baka tumaas din yung risk premia sa Hong Kong at baka magdulot din iyon ng capital flight. So may mga ganong kinukonsidera din sila. I think sa Pilipinas, from my perspective, ang isa sa mga pinaka-devastating impacts nitong anti-terrorism law ay yun ang chilling effect na yung pag-criticize ay normal na parte yan ng kahit anong demokrasya. Pero yung sinasabi kasi nitong anti-terrorism law ay gusto niyang patahimikin ang mga nagdi-dissent or nag-criticize sa gobyerno. At I think masama yung timing nun kasi now more than ever ay kailangan maging mapagmatsyag tayo sa mga polisiya ng gobyerno. Napakarami mga polisiya na kailangan nating bantayan, especially in the coming weeks and months. Kabilang dito yung mga nabanggit kanina na mga stimulus packages na Arise, Cures, tsaka yung Bayanihan to Recover as One Act. At for example, yung implementation din ng mga policies tulad ng social amelioration program, kailangan din nating bantayan parati. At kailangan hindi mangimi yung mga tao na magsalita kung may mga nakikita sila ng mga anomalies or nababagalan sila sa mga policies na ito, ay kailangan free silang mag-express ng kanilang mga sentimiento. Kasi meron itong impact sa ekonomiya. Kasi for example, meron yung Bayanihan to Recover as One Act na nadiskubre kamakailan lang na i-exempt daw yung mga certain corporations mula doon sa Philippine Competition Act. In other words, ay baka this might open the floodgates for mga abuse of market power, tsaka yung pag-usbong ng mga bagong mga monopolies na magdudulot ng mas mataas na presyo at mas mababang kalidad ng mga produkto at serbisyo sa mga susunod na buwan. So meron itong direktang impact sa mga Pilipino at kailangan ngayon pa lang ay binubusisi natin itong mga bagong polisiya na ito. Kasi yung mga masasamang polisiya, kapag iniwan natin silang unchecked tsaka uncriticized, ay magdudulot din sila mismo ng economic losses. At pwede mo sabihin siguro na baka mas malala pa yung combined economic losses na yun mula dun sa losses from terrorism. So, merong mga benefits and costs parati. Kailangan tinitimbang natin yung benefits and costs ng mga polisiyang ito. So, kailangan laging in-check ang mga polisiya. Pero ngayon na may anti-terrorism bill, ay baka mas mangininga yung mga tao na mag-criticize. And finally, tulad ng nabanggit ko kanina, dumadagdag itong bagong batas na ito dun sa environment of uncertainty and anxiety na meron sa ating lipunan. Na hindi nga natin alam kung kailan matatapos itong crisis na ito hanggang walang vaccine ay meron tayong new normal na kailangan maitawid hanggang doon sa panahon na meron ng vaccine. At dumadagdag itong sense of uncertainty na ito sa ating araw-araw na buhay. So, nabanggit ni dating NEDA Director General Ernesto Pernia na kailangan na bawasan, i-eliminate dapat yung mga policy uncertainties. Pero dahil sa anti-terrorism bill na ito, dumadagdag ito dun sa policy uncertainties sa ating bansa. At kapag matakot yung mga investors, ay baka hindi nga sila pumunta dito sa Pilipinas, baka hindi dumagsa ang mga turista, for example, at lahat ng ito ay mag-i-snowball at baka mahirapan tayong mag-recover later on kasi gusto natin makarecover tayo agad kapag meron ng vaccine, pero kapag merong uncertainty, merong capital flight, for example, ay baka mas maging matagal yung ating economic recovery. So all in all, hindi lang ito usaping legal, kundi meron itong large-scale impact sa ating ekonomiya. Yun lang po. Salamat.
Okay, maraming salamat Sir JC and all of our speakers. Siguro nakikita natin dun sa mga sinabi niyong impact sa inyong mga field that we can sense we have a sense of fear dito sa anti-terror law na ito, and all of you have reservations dun sa nangyari nga na paglagda ng ating Pangulo sa anti-terror law. So we have some questions coming in. We have a question first for Dr. Jovar. We haven't heard much from the Mindanaoans. Ano nga ba ang pulso ng mga taga Mindanao dito sa anti-terror law na ito? Kasi because of the pandemic, di ba, ang balita na saturate tayo about COVID-19 and we haven't heard much from communities in Mindanao kung ano nga ba yung insight nila. So ano po ba? Are they for or against the law? Yung po mga communities po dyan.
Basically, yung pulso ng taga Mindanao is to really review and revise or enhance the law, and it must be something that is peaceful because yung mga Mindanaoan naman, dahil sa experience nila, they would really want naka-frame sa peace efforts yung mga polisiya na ini-implement sa bansa natin. So they are against some of the provisions of the ATL, but they agree that there is a need for us to have a law that can prevent terrorism or para mawala yung terrorism.
Okay, so ang nakikita natin dyan sa Mindanao is that kailangan natin i-curb ang terrorism, but some of the provisions ng anti-terrorism law ay kailangan na i-revise because sabi nga kanina ni Sir JC, very broad din nung definition ng terrorism and it can be used against dissenters or the opposition. So, question naman kay Sir JC now that it has been signed kasi we have heard a lot of opposition sa bill na ito nung hindi pa ito nalalagdaan. So ngayon na napirmahan natin, so what are our options moving forward? So ano pa nga ba ang pwedeng gawin ng mga taong bayan ngayon na isa na itong ganap na batas?
Oo. So isa sa mga, tulad nung na-tweet ko kanina lang, ay isa sa mga insidious aspects nitong anti-terrorism bill ay batas kasi ito. So hanggang hindi ito nire-repeal ng Kongreso or dinedeclare ng Supreme Court bilang unconstitutional ay mananatili itong batas kahit na lumipat na tayo sa susunod na administrasyon. So I think meron na nag-file ng kaso sa Supreme Court contesting yung constitutionality nitong anti-terrorism bill, law. At bukod doon sa mga legal challenges na yun na magiging crucial, ay kailangan maging mapagmatsyag parati yung mga doon sa paano yung rollout nitong batas na ito. At matili silang maging vocal sa kanilang, at karapatan nila yun. At kung may mga nakita silang mga anomalya or abuses sa pag-implement nito, ay manatili tayong vocal sa ating pagbabantay sa implementation nito dahil nasa Constitution ang ating freedom of speech.
Okay, so we have questions coming in. May tayong tanong from Jerome Bactol. Ano naman ang positive side ng anti-terror law sa mga sektor po ninyo, kung meron man? Let's start again with Dr. Jobar. Meron po ba na positive side ang ATL sa inyong sektor, sa peace and development sa Mindanao?
Yun na nga yung sinabi ko kanina na yung intention talaga ng policy na to is about life, about liberty, and about protection of the people. So, ginawa naman yung batas na ito para maprotektahan ang mga tao. Yun nga lang, concern talaga yung ibang provisions kasi hindi siya responsive yung ibang provisions. Like, say for instance, doon sa extreme violence or yung violent extremism, it would be better on the part of the peace builders to respond to the drivers of violent extremism rather than putting a law that will punish the people, yung may punishment doon sa people. And if we're going to look at some data, meron talagang mga minorities na naka-experience ng wrongful accusations. So nung wala pa yung ATL, meron ng mga wrongful accusations, may nadadakip ng mga minorities na wala namang kasalanan. How much more ngayon dito sa provision, how much more ngayon dito sa ATL na masyadong relax yung accountability ng mga law enforcers. So basically, naman siya, ang intention is to protect the people, and that I think is the positive note for this ATL.
Okay, thank you, sir. Ms. Colleen, Awit, ano po ang positive side ng anti-terror law sa inyong sector po?
Gaya po ng nasabi ko kanina, even without the anti-terror law, yung abuses and attacks to our environmental defenders is already happening. And napakadelikado pong sabihin na meron po siyang advantages for the work of our conservationists and environmental defenders kasi nga with its vague and unconstitutional provisions, pwede siyang abusuhin. And if merong motivation to block the work of our environmental defenders, it will be much easier for them to label the work of environmental defenders as a threat to national security. So, para sa akin, isa talagang hindrance yung anti-terror law sa work na ginagawa ngayon ng environmental defenders now, more especially ngayon na we are amidst a climate emergency.
Okay, thank you po, Sir JC. Same question for you. Ano po ang positive side ng ATL sa inyong sector, sa business and economy?
Tulad nung nabanggit ko kanina, Jervis, ay wala naman nagko-contest na ang terorismo ay merong economic damages na kailangan nating bawasan at kailangan din talaga nating supuin ang terorismo. Pero sa batas na ito kasi ay baka meron kang well-intentioned naman ito, pero merong tinatawag kasi na unintended consequences kung saan kahit na maganda yung layunin ng isang polisiya o batas, ay baka magdulot ito ng mas maraming problema at damages later on. So ito yung nakikita natin dito na merong far-reaching effects ito, hindi lang sa human rights, for example, or sa rule of law sa Pilipinas, kundi pati sa ekonomiya. So ganun, so merong unintended consequences at sa tingin ko on net, ito ay mas makakasamang batas kaysa nung wala pa itong batas na ito.
Okay, so another question that we have, today meron ng official na petition sa Supreme Court para magkaroon ng TRO dito sa batas na ito. So do you think na mapapakinggan ng Supreme Court itong mga people opposing the anti-terror law given our political climate? Anyone could answer po. Sa tingin nyo ba ay mapapakinggan yung mga ganitong petition na itigil muna ang pagpapatupad nitong anti-terror law? Dr. Jobar?
Yes. If we work on the frame of peace and development, and our government is working on the frame of peace and development, there's a hope that the Supreme Court will listen to us. Like say for instance, we noticed na doon sa usapin ng ATL when it was still doon sa Congress at saka sa Senate, parang there were consultations that were made and we acknowledge that, we recognize that. But remember when we talk about problem on peace and development, masyadong sikat si Mindanao dyan. And how come na parang konti lang yung representation ng taga Mindanao when it was discussed. I'm hoping that the Supreme Court will consider some of the concerns of the different sectors of the peace stakeholders kasi para naman po ito sa ikakabuti ng ating bansa, if ever para sa ikakabuti ng ating bansa. And yun na nga sinasabi ko, hindi madali ang pagkamit ng kapayapaan at kaunlaran. And I think what we are undergoing right now is part of the process. And there's a big hope for me that I hope we work on the peace building frame and we consider the voices and some expressions of people for positive change.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jovar. Ms. Awit, do you have an answer for that question? Sa tingin niyo ba ay mapapakinggan ng Supreme Court and maybe other institutions as well yung pagtutol ng maraming tao dito nga sa anti-terror law?
Kami dito sa Negros, kaming mga kabataan, lalo-lalo na yung mga kabataan, we are hopeful na sana mapakinggan ito kasi nga we can never pursue national security at the expense of our basic freedoms and our human rights. And forging this path, yung pagpasa ng law na to, can further lead to a divide and can further lead to unrest and violence.
Okay, thank you. Sir JC, your thoughts?
Oo. So I think, Jervis, ay malinaw naman yung legal infirmities nito, no? So marami ng legal experts na dinetalye kung ano yung mga problema dito sa anti-terrorism bill at we're hoping na sana makinig yung Supreme Court. Of course, issue din yung ilang porsyento na ng mga kasalukuyang Supreme Court justices ang inappoint ni Pangulong Duterte, pero hirap mag-speculate doon kung paano sila mag-decide on this. Pero as far as the legal provisions are concerned, I think klaro naman yung aning infirmities at sana ay makinig yung Supreme Court. Yung sa mga institusyon na tanging makakapagpigil ng implementasyon nito.
Okay, we have a question here specifically for Sir JC and Ms. Awit. Hindi ba mas pabor sa big polluting corporations ang anti-terror law malaking issue ang pag-exploit ng natural resources sa probinsya at may mga pinapatay na aktivista para lang mag-railroad ng project. So, Miss Awit, maybe you have thoughts? Di ba mas pabor sa big polluting corporation sa ito?
Yes po. Para sa amin, nakikita namin na mas pabor talaga to yung anti-terror law on big polluting companies and businesses and corporations. Kasi nga, sabi ko nga kanina, I mentioned it earlier na one of its effect is it can use, the law can be used against the individuals and groups who call out big corporations who exploit our natural resources and our ancestral domains. And pwede din siyang gamitin to those who demand these corporations accountable for their actions. So, napaka-pabor talaga ng ATL sa mga big polluting corporations. And nasabi ko rin kanina na pwede siyang gamitin to legalize and to fast-track these polluting and destructive projects. Yun po.
Okay.
Salamat.
So, JC, you have thoughts on that question?
Maganda na yung sagot ni Awit. Wala na akong may dadagdag doon.
Okay, sige po. So ngayon, we'll be giving you some time to give your last statements. Ano nga ba ang tinutungo ng ating bansa ngayon na meron na tayong bagong anti-terror law? Maybe you have calls to action. Let's start with Dr. Jovar.
Oo. Gusto ko lang dagdag doon sa hope doon sa Supreme Court. I think they will consider some of the concerns because I think yung Supreme Court naman will look into the constitutionality. Hindi naman ako legal expert, but di ba meron doon issue sa human rights and mga articles ng constitution na nalalabag ng ATL. And I think these concerns will be reviewed by the Supreme Court, and hopefully they will consider. Ano nga yung question?
Final statement na lang, sir. Your final statement before we wrap up this discussion.
Yung ano ko lang is sa mga authorities, sa peace stakeholders, let's voice out and express our stand because this is a democratic country and that everyone's voice is actually counted here. So if we want to have an appropriate and responsive law to prevent and eradicate terrorism in our country, let's have a dialogue. Let's continue our conversation because this is a peaceful process. So thank you very much.
Maraming salamat po, Dr. Jovar. Ms. Colleen Awit, your final word for this afternoon's discussion on the anti-terror law po.
So, supposedly, di ba yung anti-terror bill, it lapses into law sa July 9, which is 5 days from now. Pero, nawindang tayong lahat yesterday when we were all caught unprepared. And in the middle of a health crisis, we were robbed of our rights. And kung saan mas kailangan natin ng mga konkretong mga solusyon, mas pinili pong kitilin yung ating demokrasya. So, at a time like this, we should, especially the youth, we should know our rights and our basic freedoms. And when things get worse, we should know how to be assertive of these rights. And sa mga fellow climate activists and environmental defenders, protecting the environment also means protecting its defenders. So now is the time for us to really uphold solidarity. Sama-sama po tayong lahat at supportahan natin ang isa't isa, lalong-lalo na sa pagkamit ng hustisyang panghimat. Salamat po.
Maraming salamat po, Ms. Awit. And now, Sir JC po, your final thoughts, final word for this discussion.
Oo. Kanina binabasa ko lang yung libro na How Democracies Die. At meron doon na parte tungkol doon sa kung paano tinatag bilang terorismo o kalaban ng Estado yung mga kritiko. At sinasabi doon na yung demokrasya ay importante na merong tinatawag na mutual tolerance, kung saan hindi natin dapat ituring na kalaban mga kritiko, kundi kailangan natin itolerate na meron talagang mga diversity ng mga opinion sa isang demokrasya. So yun yung nawawala na kailangan paitingin natin yung ganong klaseng norm at culture sa ating politika. Pero ayun nga, so tulad ng nabanggit kanina, ang daming mga problema ngayon, yung pandemic, saka economic crisis, kailangan unahin talaga yun eh. At bahala talaga yung maling timing nitong batas na ito. Pero bilang panghuli, yung bukod sa legal challenges sa Supreme Court, at siguro later baka i-repeal ng Kongreso, siguro kailangan yung mga tao din maging parating mapagbantay din. Kasi sa mga susunod na linggo at buwan, makikita na natin kung paano ito i-implement ng gobyerno. So kailangan maging mapagbantay tayo all throughout.
Okay, maraming salamat po, Sir JC Punong Bayan. It has been a very rich discussion on the anti-terror law this afternoon. Pero unfortunately, may oras po tayong sinusunod. So maraming salamat po sa inyong tatlo for your insight. So at this point, I'm turning you over again to Mark for the next chapter of this discussion.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Jervis Manahan, for doing a wonderful job moderating the two panels. And salamat din sa mga guest speakers natin sa unang panel, si Commissioner Ryan Enriquez and Congresswoman Sara Ilago. And sa ating second panel na si Dr. Jobar Pantao, Ms. Colleen Awit, and Mr. JC Punong Bayan. Maraming salamat po sa inyong oras at kontribusyon sa ating diskusyon. At sa mga nanonood, salamat for an active participation. And to close the first episode of Social Conversations, I'd like to call on the member of the UN Youth Advisory Board Philippines, and to introduce, she is a young woman activist, entrepreneur, and philanthropist who is passionate about the ASEAN and wider Asia-Pacific region. She graduated with a Master of Arts in Coexistence and Conflict Resolution from Brandeis University in Boston, and completed the programs on negotiation and mediation at the Harvard Law School. Owing to her multicultural heritage and studies around the Abrahamic traditions and languages, she completed her practicum in Jerusalem while following parliamentary lobbies at the Knesset. She has since published on the Jerusalem Post, Times of Israel, and Zilzar Life for Muslim Millennials. In October 2018, she was featured in Lifestyle Asia section 24-Hour Woman. Professionally, she has worked as a communications consultant for the USAID ASEAN Youth Volunteer Program in Malaysia, UN Women, and UN Habitat in New York, as well as UNESCO Dream Center in the Philippines. As a passion project, she co-founded the Asian Youth Peace Network under the patronage of the Asian Youth Council and International Youth Center. With this, she sits as a founding member of Friends for Leadership, a network launched at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum in Russia, as well as the ASEAN Youth Representative to the UN Interagency Network on Youth Development. During the COVID-19 pandemic, she managed the Family Foundation as well as transport business, through which SDG Villages was launched, a sustainable livelihoods program for daily wage earners affected by the national quarantine. It's my honor to welcome Ms. Regina Guevara.
Hi, magandang gabi. Narinig ba ako?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much to our moderator, all our speakers, especially the two important youth leaders of our generation, no, NYC Chair Ryan and Congressman Sara, for the confidence and the trust you've given us tonight. Salamat din sa Global Shapers sa pag-anyaya. Ito na ang, I think, second or third installation ng UN Youth Advisory Board. Earlier, we collaborated with 2030 Youth Force and YPeer, so hi na rin kay Jules at kay Ralph. So our aim is really to bring together young public servants from across the socio-political spectrum. Last time, we brought together youth from the major political parties because we believe that this is our generation, you know, so it's up to us to claim yung tinatawag na new normal. Paano ba natin to gagawing better normal? From Philippine Independence Day, yung una naming webinar, natutunan namin yung katagang sa Ingles. None of us are free until all of us are free. So makikita natin sa karanasan ng mas malawak na rehiyon ng Asia, you know, meron tayong mga Rohingya refugees sa Myanmar, and then sa buong mundo ngayon sa US, kanilang 4th of July ngayon, meron din ng Black Lives Matter movement. Dito sa Pilipinas, as Filipinos, we have many nuances of what freedom means to the Moro, to the Lumad, to the left, the right, to the old, the young, woman, man, LGBTQI. But despite this, it seems, you know, there's one common narrative that surfaces from left to right or kung anumang identity yung nire-represent nyo. Philippines as a nation takes pride in our youth movements. As you know from history, the very formation of the Republic traces from our young heroes from Rizal and Bonifacio. The experience of people power revolutions are characterized by student activism, and even the Bangsamoro peace process itself is significantly youth-led. So tonight we are confronted with another major issue of our nation, the Anti-Terrorism Act. And it forces a discussion on the nexus of peace and security. Yun yung dalawang mga salitang madalas natin marinig sa issue ng ATV, di ba? Peace and then security. As if it's a chicken and egg. Ano bang mauuna? Kailangan ba may security muna bago magkaroon ng peace? Kailangan ba may peace muna bago magkaroon ng security? Pero sa totoo lang, sa tingin ko, hindi naman to competition. May terror kung may inosenteng namatay, be it by formal or informal actors. May terror kung may inosenteng nagutom. May terror kung may inosenteng nahuli. Either way, walang panalo sa kahit anong klaseng terror. But let's go back to the basic, fundamental, universal principles. This is about human rights. A state that should protect it and people who should all equally enjoy it. Sinasabi nga nila, diba, we can't have any human right if it infringes on the right of other people. And it goes across all of the sides of this discussion. So what is our call to action? It's a counter-narrative. Sa UN, mayroong pinasa na Security Council Resolution 2250 at lahat ng mga bansang miyembro ng United Nations ay sumang-ayon dito. UN Security Council Resolution 2250 stresses the importance that young people play, the positive role of young people in the maintenance and promotion of international peace and security. Let us build on the foundation offered by this resolution in shifting from fear-driven, reactive, and remedial militarized security responses to a more politically and economically, socially empowering approach. So that's why we have the Sustainable Development Goals, because it seeks to put forward a positive narrative on what we should be doing in terms of development to achieve sustaining peace. So point one, kanina meron tayong the privilege of having our NYC chair. We recommend the NYC to continue encouraging the youth, regardless of their political persuasions, to join consultations, such as this webinar and others that NYC can continue organizing. And it should be part of the National Youth Assessment Study, which then serves as basis for the PH Youth Development Plan. Second, to our young parliamentarians, such as Congressman Ilago and also many others, or even just parliamentarians at large and public servants, let us focus on evidence-based data, which has shown through this webinar and others that terrorism and armed conflict necessitate a more complex socio-economic lens. There is no lasting peace without socio-economic justice. We can build upon many existing initiatives as well. Maraming pagkukulang ang gobyerno, pero meron ding mga iniimplementa na andito na, katulad ng kunwari ang ating CAB Secretary, merong Task Force Zero Hunger. Bakit hindi natin pagpunan ng mas maraming atensyon at resources ang ating Task Force on Zero Hunger? Meron na tayong current civil-military operations to counter insurgency. Ang ating mga military through the years have been involved in humanitarian and development efforts. So our call to action finally is an intergenerational solidarity. Nabanggit na to kanina ng ating sa mga youth speakers sa second panel. Solidarity, Youth for Peace. Kasama natin sa movement na to na tinatawag na Youth Peace Security ang mga kabataan sa iba't ibang mga bansa sa rehiyon at pati sa buong mundo. It's a counter-narrative that is less divisive and more values-driven. Ano ba yung mga values natin bilang isang generation? Because this is our generation. Let us go back to the whys of what we do. Para sa mga young lawyers dyan, why did you decide to take up law? Why are you a public servant if you're holding a specific position or you're in office? Why are you a youth leader? Sa araw-araw na pagising natin, ano ang naimbag mo para sa kapwa mo? Kahirapan o karapatan? Takot o tunay na mapagpalayang kapayapaan? The National Society of Parliamentarians is working towards a youth peace security legislation to go back to the basics of positive peace. Positive peace upwards to the upward movement of the social classes, progress for human rights, forward peace building. Kasama dito yung funding capacity building of youth-led programs. For instance, yung Asian Youth Peace Network, meron kaming e-learning modules for young public servants to increase the agency of ang ating mga youth councils, our SKs, our youth centers, youth parliaments, organizations, political parties. So we can elevate these youth spaces from being mere instruments of the old and backward world. Paurong tayo, wag pabalik. Padayon Pilipinas. Thank you po.
All right, maraming salamat, Ms. Regina, for that strong call to action. And I echo with you, especially about, you mentioned about intergenerational solidarity. So this is to encourage everyone now to take a stand, to advocate for critical thinking, and to uphold the Constitution and our human rights. And bago tayo mag-close, gusto ko lang muli pasalamatan ang ating organization partners. We have WASTE, we have Bridge 360, Reboot Philippines, UST-CBA Council, Youth Advocates for the Philippines, Sigaw ng Kabataan Coalition, EarthGuard USLS, SK San Rafael San Rodriguez Rizal, Lundoyan, and Youth for Human Rights and Democracy. Maraming salamat po muli sa mga tumutok sa ating discussion about this controversial anti-terror law. Please do follow us on our social media accounts dahil hindi ito ang una at huling episode ng Social Conversations. Marami pa, kaya keep posted. Again, on behalf of the Global Shapers Manila Hub, maraming salamat. This has been your host, Mark Joseph Laseste. Good evening, everyone.